welcome to the fifth Sunday of Easter. Anne and I are actually in the same place. We are seen together occasionally. We're married, in case you don't know. So we are here in Carey's Bay. Nicki is in Brisbane in front of a beautiful but rather static river. And Bishop Kelvin...
River.
A Scottish river, is it? And Bishop Kelvin, you're hiding in a fog. But lovely to have you with us. I've just been driving through Cromwell and the beautiful vineyards, which are so golden at the moment. And here we have a passage about the vine and the branches. And Kelvin, you have some background.
Yes, it's a difficult passage to give background for, I suppose, because everybody knows this bit. This is one of those metaphors of Jesus, which is one of the best known in the New Testament. And one of the things I'd like to emphasize at the start is that it is a metaphor. And I've heard so often people treating it as though it is the law of the Medes and Persians and basing quite sort of firm doctrine on it. But it's something that really comes in through the right side of the brain, not the left, if you catch that meaning. And the thing that strikes me about this metaphor is it comes right in the middle of Jesus's great communication with his disciples, both teaching and prayer, which was based around the Last Supper. And this was a time of immense transition for the disciples. So you think about what's happened beforehand. Lazarus has been raised from the dead, which I think is the beginning of the Passion story. And then Jesus has gathered his disciples for the Passover, and he's washed his disciples' feet and thrown them all into confusion by doing that. Then he's foretold Peter's betrayal. Thomas has begun to express the sort of doubts which will become even more concrete later in the gospel. And Judas has gone out to betray him. So his friends are deserting him left, right, and center. And he says to the others that many will fall away and, that it's going to be tough. And we look forward to what's going to happen, that the disciples are going to be faced soon with Jesus's death in the most horrific way, and their whole worldview is going to be turned upside down. And Jesus teaches them and prays for them in these chapters towards the end of John's Gospel. And this metaphor falls right in the middle. The thing that strikes me about this metaphor is that it's a metaphor of growth and change. And faith is about growth and change. When I think about what's happening for his disciples, they're betraying him left, right, and center, is that in all of this great speech and in his prayers, there is no anger, there's no recrimination, there's no threatening to throw people out. His big concern is for his disciples to be able to survive through all of the vast changes which are going to happen to them. And this metaphor tells us that his disciples will survive by abiding in him. That's not about believing in what he's saying, but about living in the teachings that he's given them. And elsewhere in this great discourse, he tells us what abiding in him means. It means doing what he asks of us, loving one another as he loves us.
Well, thank you. And key word emerging there right at the end is abide, but also this desertion that we're about to see from the followers of Jesus. And I can turn to Anne this time, and because Anne incidentally is standing in a very short notice, so we'll let you off a few hooks. But tell me what's challenging.
Well, I hooked onto that word abide as well, but in the sense of making your home with Jesus. And I think the challenge there probably stems from reading The Practice of the Presence of God rather a lot in my teens. And, it's a wonderful little book, and it's inspiring, and it's completely impossible. And living with the guilt of just not being able to, be constantly praying and constantly whatever. I think what helped recently was the wonderful Penelope Wilcock, who's written The Hawk and the Dove series, has also written, I think it was an Advent series, could have been Lent, where her character, Jesus, pops in for breakfast and, chats over the breakfast table, and then joins her in the gardening and wanders down to catch the bus with her. And it's just the most ordinary sort of interactions. And suddenly it began to feel, maybe that's possible. That sort of living with reminded me, possibly apocryphal, but I remember someone telling me at one point, a Jewish friend saying to a Christian, you Christians, you're engaged to God. Now we Jews, we're an old married couple. That instead of the high pressure of the engagement, just the settled abiding and living.
Thank you for short notice. We are an old married couple.
We're not
Okay, that's right.
but we're not actually abiding together very much.
We're not very often. Nikki, you got married shortly after us, so it's your turn to talk about challenge.
Okay, so from another old part of a married couple, I think when we are approaching a biblical text that is so familiar, that's the first challenge. The very first challenge is, how are we reading this? Have we got the open eyes, open heart? Are we ready to see something fresh? That's the first challenge. Then, hopefully, once we're in that space, we see the message for ourselves and our context and where we are. So the challenge is in that metaphor and how we see God the gardener, Jesus as the main vine, and the branches that come off that vine. But of course, we often think that we can go it alone in our faith and in ministry. We often think, no, I've got this, it's all good. Surely I'm on the right path. My theology is the best. And but we can't. And it's a challenge to then remember, hopefully frequently, that we must do it through community, through relationship.
Good, thank you, I think. Kelvin, what do you find challenging then?
Well, I find challenging the whole concept of the pruning and the gathering up of the waste, throwing it in the fire, which many have taken as a proof text for the existence of hell. But I see it somewhat differently than that. I'm not sure that you read through this great passage, Jesus condemns no one. He says his disciples are going to desert him, but he doesn't condemn them for it. He understands why and knows how things are going to work out. And he doesn't condemn any of us. But I think what this passage tells me is that there's bits of me which are going to have to go. And these are the bits which conspire against myself and conspire against other people. And that these have got no place in the kingdom of God and will be cut out. And the cutting out is likely to be involuntary, and it's likely to be painful. And that's part of the call of the Christian life, is to say to God, do whatever you find necessary to make me fit. And he takes us at our word.
Indeed. So there's kind of pain in surrendering to God. And yet I want to hear some good news, so you don't just leave us with the pain. So Anne,
Back to me.
Back to you, and a little bit of good news here.
Okay. I remember a few weeks ago when we had the story of the angel talking at the tomb. One of the things that struck me was how gracious the angel was in kind of leading the woman step by step through their understanding. I have a similar sort of good news whenever I read the I am statements of Jesus, because he chooses such wonderfully simple things to identify with himself, bread and water, and in this case of a vine, almost as if he's saying, okay, you're never going to understand fully God. Obviously, we're not. But hey, it's okay. Here's one way of thinking about me, and it's so incredibly simple and basic and concrete that any of us can get it. And so I love that about the fact that the grace of God meeting us where we are with something that we actually are capable of understanding.
Okay, good, thank you. That's quite encouraging good news. Kelvin, for you, the good news?
Good news is in the metaphor, vine and branches. Where does the branch end and where does the vine begin? They merge seamlessly one into the other, and they are actually the same entity. And for me, that's an astonishing thought, that Christ has a sort of a continuity with my being. And it's a wonderful thought, and it's a very daunting thought at the same time.
Why? Well, absolutely daunting. Nicki, for you, some good news.
Continuing with that metaphor, it was just this morning I was in my backyard, and really and truly, the garden and the trees are being taken over by two separate vines. One is a weed, a cat's claw, and for the life of me, I can't get rid of it because it's tenacious. But the other one is a passion fruit vine planted most deliberately by the side fence. And interestingly, I am getting to the good news, but interestingly, like the passion fruit vine, for all intents and purposes, almost looks dead as it comes out of the ground. And I've made this mistake before of cutting, thinking it was dead, and then actually way, way, way up have foiled the life that is going on. And as I have to acknowledge too, that it's both those vines that are in many ways the greenest of the entire garden. So the good news, continuing with this metaphor, is the vines are the intertwining, and they get really tangled, and it's really messy. And as I'm going through to find the lost ball for the dog, I'm getting tangled in these tendrils that are just, seeking and searching. And it's a wonderful metaphor to remind us that that is what we should always be doing, seeking and searching, and always being encouraged by the fact that we are part of something so much bigger. And I think that's the best good news I can take, is that continuing of that idea too, that our lives can be messy and entangled and completely disastrous, but Jesus has got us. We're all good.
All that and a lovely glimpse of a Brisbane garden. Thank you, Nicki. Let's conclude with a scamp around some applications. Some so what from you. I'm going to go back to you, Nicki. So what?
So what? As a church, we have to look at the things that we have to leave behind. What are the bad habits? What are the things that are out of date? And don't want to sound too black and white about, but what does need to be pruned so that the new growth can come through? And that's the so what. What do we get from here? And are we grounded in Jesus, or are we grounded in our own sense of I can do it on my own? So what? We've got to be part of something that's bigger and abide.
Oh, look, I think that's a very powerful application.
Me?
Anne.
Okay, so what? I think one thing we haven't really made a big deal of is the fact that there's the connection between Jesus and the Father as well. This kind of tender relationship, which Jesus is telling the disciples of the closeness of that relationship just before a time when the disciples might think that God's deserted him. And then it's that same tender and close relationship which we're promised. So I guess part of a so what would be, whatever it looks like, we are still tended and cared for and connected, and beyond the dip in the road, there's still hope.
Particularly pertinent, a slightly crazy era that we're living in. Kelvin, a final word. So what?
That tenderness and closeness of relationship is so what is how do we maintain that? How do I maintain that? Jesus says that I must abide in him. And when am I doing that? And how do I abide in him? Not just today, but for as long as he wants me here on this planet.
And beyond.
And beyond.
Beyond, of course. Yes.
Thank you very much. It's a well-known passage. It's been enriching to hear it broken open once again. So, Nicki, Kelvin, Anne, thanks for breaking it open with me.
Good to be here.